women are called men in the translation from Greek to Latin. So I'm aware of this idea, and of course Brian's work as well. And in my field, that's one. We have categories for, obviously, like medicine, it has different categories. And that's one category, is entheogens and different types of religions. So the early Christian church, I would say that I don't agree that all of Christian tradition is this. I would say that there definitely is a lot of it. But there are also other types of, Christian traditions. I mean, when I look at the Jesus movement in the first century, it to me looks like a philosophical school, like Plato. And, Plato did the mysteries, but I don't know I think Jesus was part of an Essene movement, like the John the Baptist is Jewish. He's out in the desert and, they're practicing these water rites, and they basically are, they have their own community. And he looked like he had been baptized into this community. So the Jews in the first century are just trying to survive because Rome is killing them and they're going to destroy their temple. So, so a lot of these communities, so that's one interpretation, and I'm not discounting that that's correct for those traditions, but there are other traditions that are not. They're not.
No, I'm sure.
Filled with entheogens and things like that. I'm just being accurate. That's all I could do.
I'm sure there's a lot. I mean,
it was super diverse. Today, look at how diverse it is. So I think there are thousands of Protestant denominations and there's Catholicism and, so we have so many different, and even Catholics don't even know what they're supposed to believe. So some here believe this, some over here believe that. They have the same mass that they go to, but their belief structures are different.
So that leads us to one of the most fascinating interpretations of what we're experiencing collectively when it comes to this UFO, UAP, whatever it is, phenomenon. That this is not a thing from another planet that comes on a spaceship and lands here to show us how to do things correctly, but that they've always been here, and that they are the things that are being described in Ezekiel, that they are a phenomenon that is both here and not here at the same time, that you are literally dealing with angels and demons, that this phenomenon is connected to these ancient stories of religion, and it's not as simple as other beings like us from somewhere else.
Okay, yeah. So I can respond to that. All right. So because you said a huge amount of information in there, and I'm going to parse out some of that and tell you just about what I think. So part of why I continued to study this was that I saw that the historical record included a lot of these events. And these events were weird back then, just like they're weird today.
Right.
And when you look at these events back in that time period, you also see a common pattern that happens today. And what is that pattern? That pattern is that, let's take St. Francis of Assisi's stigmata. I don't know if you want to show,
Sure.
So if you look at his stigmata, where it looks like he's being, basically radiated by a UFO, that's what my students say when they go and they see this in the Louvre and such. If you look at the primary sources for that, this happens in the 1200s, and you look at what, so here you see St. Francis, but also over here on the right, you see his friend, Brother Leo. Brother Leo actually at the time is probably 15 or something like that. He's
15?
Yeah, he's really young.
Hard life back then. Dude looks 80.
Well, he doesn't actually look like that. So the artists actually are not getting at the primary sources, and that's what similar things are happening today. So the representations that we get in the media don't look at all like an abduction. They don't look at all what people experience. And so what I did was I went through a lot of the primary source materials for Teresa of Avila has a weird experience that looks like an abduction. But they look beautiful. They're domesticated. They're made to look a lot more happy or something like that. And I think part of the reason for that, I don't think is intentional. I think because it's traumatic. I think because once you recognize the people themselves are traumatized by this in both good and bad ways. Okay, so this experience is still happening. To call it angels and demons is accurate except for one part, and because there are bad things that happen. Sometimes people get hurt. Francis died from that wound, or he died from wounds that were bleeding so when he had this experience until he died, which was about a year and a half later, they tried to keep it silent in his monastery because they didn't know what happened to him, and they were horrified by it. Okay. And so until he died, they didn't actually tell anybody. So he kept it between him, Brother Leo, and probably another monk. So there's this idea of shame almost, this is like, shameful. But also this idea that, bad things happen. And that's why people say, well, demonic or something
destroyed.
like that. And people do experience these things in different ways. And they still do. But what should we call it? Should we then use the terminology of people from 100 years ago and call it angels and demons? I don't think we should. I think that what we have to do is we have to take case by case, look at patterns, and maybe just try to proceed with different language. Because some of the things were really interesting. If you do look at, say, experiences that Catholics have, say in the 1960s, that have been videotaped, okay? So Virgin Mary experiences where the Virgin Mary appears. And she reads people's minds, and she does, she's doing these kinds of things, levitating people together. If you put physics on that.
All the time. I know a lot of people have had very negative experiences, like horrific experiences of demons and negative encounters. I've had none. I've had no negative experiences like that. My experiences are all in these very enlightened, bizarre creatures that contact you.
Ugh.
And they seem to know, like, what's wrong with me, like, right away. And they seem to, like, also work on you. Like, there's this bizarre feeling, like, they're like, let me get in there and fix your fucking... That certainly seems to be...
Written a heck of a lot. And his name is Stephen Dick.
Secondo Pia, an amateur, became the first to...
So I'm going to push back on your interpretation. Although I'm not going to say that psilocybin and mushrooms aren't part of that iconography. I would say that a lot of the iconography is going to be something about the light that emanates from people who are accessing these realms. And I say that because I've read so many reports, and they're not. I think that if some of the monks and nuns who report being lit up right in their cells and things like that, if they were doing psilocybin, if they were doing mushrooms, they would have said so. They would have written it because they write a lot. So the Catholics have immense records. They took good notes.
Well, I don't think it's the only way to do it.
Oh, I know. I
think it's something that they discovered.
And for sure. I think it's
a part of it.
I do. Yeah, I think that. But so the magnetism of what's, this kind of light that's happening, you can see that even in the Shroud of Turin, which is, by the way, an anomalous artifact that scientists have looked at, even atheist scientists have looked at it, and it appears to be some type of imprint from radiation onto a cloth.
I don't know what that move is.
So
back here.
I think we're talking about forms of light as well.
But the Shroud of Turin is only 500 years old.
Well, not necessarily. So
really,
yeah. So there are certain parts of it that could have been repaired that are 500 years old. So the problem is there is a whole department of you should get this priest on here, by the way. You'd have a really good discussion with him. Mm-hmm. He's an expert on the Shroud of Turin, and he just came out with new research that's been done about 6 months ago. And there's a whole department in the Vatican just for doing research on the Shroud of Turin.
Please take.
So it's not necessarily just 500 years old. that there are different parts of it. It's, you know how you were talking about the parchment?
Yes.
Is the Shroud of Turin real after all? 1988 report wrote off the relic as a medieval fake, but now the science seems to be turning. Could it have been a miracle all along? Fascinating. Okay, let's see what it's.
Other than just that.
170 peer-reviewed academic papers on the shroud have been published in scientific and archaeological journals around the world. Despite all the attention, there's little consensus of just how ancient this ancient linen really is, or what it actually shows. The record places the shroud in, how do you say that? Lyrie?
Let's see.
L-I-R-E-Y? Northern
right, yeah.
France. For 4 years until 1357, the Alpine town of Chambéry from 1502 to 1578, where it was damaged by fire before being passed to the Dukes of Savoy in 1578. The Savoys moved it to their capital, Turin, and aside from periods of wartime evacuation, has stayed in the World Chapel of San Giovanni Battista Cathedral ever since. Consensus has been the shroud's history pre-1300 will never be established,
you.
yet the French historian Jean-Christine Petitfils, how do you say that? Petitfils has recently published a seriously reviewed 400-page analysis of all the archaeological and scientific studies so far, and in Italy, the peer-reviewed findings of a specialist X-ray study by a team of physicists indicate that the fabric is potentially up to 2,000 years old. There are now 6 studies which challenge the idea that the Turin shroud has nothing more than a cunning piece of medieval trickery. Could it be something more? The cloth, which has been the object of mass veneration by Catholic faithful for centuries, was acquired by a French knight, Geoffroy de Charny. How do you say that? How would you say that? Charny.
I'm not quite sure.
Who deposited it in a monastery in Lire, about 130 miles east of Paris in 1353. This was a time of unparalleled relic mongering and forgery, and according to the American archaeologist William Meekum, the shroud was most likely arrived in Europe along with many other relics looted from churches and monasteries during the Crusades. Research in 2015 reported the analysis and identification of dust and pollen samples extracted by an adhesive which suggested that the shroud may have undergone a journey from the ancient Near East after the sack of I can never say his name. I know, I can never say it. Constantinople in 1204. Still, were it not for the poignant image of its folds, chances are it would have disappeared into the mores of other spurious relics kept in thousands of churches all over Western Europe. In Petitfils' latest book, how do you say it? Petitfils?
I'm not actually Petitfils is what I would say. But
Les Saints Soirées de Turin témoignent de la Passion de la Jesus Christ. The Holy Shroud of Turin, witness to the Passion of Jesus Christ. He examines more than 100 years of historical, archaeological, and scientific research. His conclusion, the cloth has all the characteristics of authenticity. Interesting.
Oh.
You're back? Even those who reject the idea the shroud is a 2,000-year-old, how do you say that word? Sepulchral cloth, he writes, are unable to explain the imprint of the body. Adversaries of the authenticity of the shroud come up against an enigma, that this one cannot be the work of a counterfeiter because to make such an image would have required unknown scientific knowledge in the Middle Ages. The image is not a painting. No trace of brushstrokes, no outline has been observed even under electron microscope. We must exclude the hypothesis of a smear, the application of a bas relief of wood or marble, or a metal statue heated and placed on the cloth. It was the Catholic Church itself unwittingly sparked what would become a global obsession with the shroud in 1898 when it gave the green light to a rare public exhibition of the cloth. Secondo Pia, an amateur, became the first to photograph the linen's strange sepia shadows and the high contrast created by black and white photography, enhanced by blurry stains. When Pia went to the darkroom to check his plates, he was startled to see that the negatives revealed a haunting, perfectly proportional facial image of a serene, bearded man in the imprint of a body tortured by what appears to be flogging, lacerations, and puncture wounds. Can we see an actual image of what the
Yeah, that's it.
is that the actual image?
Yeah.
Can you click on that, Jamie, and make it large? Wow.
Let's see this.
How bizarre. Where are the puncture wounds? Is that what we're seeing in his stomach?
Maybe
area?
right here, this thing.
Yeah,
wrist.
right? And that is where they didn't go through the hands. They
Right.
did go through the wrists when they
Right.
crucified people. And then there also appears to be something in his stomach. Like if
Yeah.
you look above his right arm, right above the wrist, that looks like a wound, which is what is detailed in the Bible.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah.
So if that really is 2000, very bizarre. Very bizarre. Yeah. You ever hear of the Second Coming Project?
No.
I used to have a joke about it. Second Coming Project was a group of people that were. It was either a troll, they were joking around, or they were serious about it, where they wanted to obtain DNA from the Shroud of Turin and clone Jesus, and that's how Jesus would come
I have
back.
heard about this. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow, that would be so weird.
Imagine. That's how they do it.
That
I
would
mean-
be so amazing.
Yeah, that would kind of. That wouldn't create immaculate conception, but it kind of would.
It seems like it.
I mean,
right?
it's not
Yeah.
birthed
Yeah.
from a virgin,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
similar in that regard.
Right.
But that's one of the things that I had a conversation with Taylor Sheridan the other day. We were discussing like what is the Bible trying to say when it describes certain things. But in the beginning there was light, and how God created everything in 6 days. Like, God, doesn't that sound like the Big Bang? Like told
Yeah.
through the telephone
I think so.
game?
Yeah. So the Catholic Church and science go together. Like even Catholics can believe in evolution. They don't generally know that. They believe in evolution. It's just theistic evolution.
Right.
That's all.
Right.
And most Catholics don't know that, and I don't know why. But Catholics, yeah, we're scientific.
I've been messing around with this idea over the last few years that the universe itself is God.
I think, yeah, I mean,
This idea that like
Yeah.
God created the universe,
yeah.
maybe it is God.
Hmm.
I mean, if you want to talk about something that's all powerful, beyond comprehension, is responsible for every single thing in the cosmos, it is the universe. That all has some sort of law that keeps it together.
Like
and
an
it's
intelligence.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's completely mysterious. One of the things you talked about in your book that's really fascinating was the Apollo 10, when they were hearing space music
Yeah.
and they didn't want to talk about it.
No, they didn't.
What did they describe it like?
You can hear it actually online.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's hear it. Apollo 10 space music. Let's fucking go. Maybe this will be my new workout music. Space music. I didn't know you
It
could
really
hear it
freaked them
online.
out.
I would imagine.
Dr. Aya Whiteley, she's a space psychologist. She's the one who told me about it and said you should put this as a quote before my information, because she talked about how they didn't want to report it because it was so weird. And that's the whole idea of this two data set. There are two data sets for UFO reporting. Like pilots will see stuff, but they won't report it.
Right.
Or they'll see stuff and they'll report stuff, but they won't. Let's listen, I guess.
Here we go.
You want some more brownies? Now. First, a little hungry. That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound? Yeah. Woo! Look at your... Yeah, it sounds like, outer space type music. Hey, Tom, is your insulation all burned off here on the front side of your window over here? Right? Yeah. Mine's all burned off. Heading out here, where are you, John? You might get thirsty in the future, Gino. Someone will fix you some grape juice. Hey?
This goes on for 5 minutes. I don't know.
So it's just that sound.
I think it's the sound. There are two tones. There's kind of like this high pitched
Gee.
sound and then that sound. Yeah.
You got wrecked.
Yeah, and you're also getting it. It's a recording from inside, and obviously it's not going to sound exactly how they were hearing it.
This video can't be this. It's not. It's just video. I think like stock video of them on the mission.
Oh, so this is not the video of them
No
experiencing
way.
it?
No way. The audio would be recorded separately from this, and I think someone just mixed this together, so there's something to look at. While
Let's see
you're
if there's just a recording of the audio itself
I
without these
tried.
guys.
This is the full. This is the one that said full audio. I don't know. Like this is from CBS. I don't know.
Good.
Sounds the same.
All right, that is.
That sounds like it. Wow.
Yeah,
Mystery music heard space. Ooh. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
What do they think it is?
Well, what happens now, I don't know what they think it is, but I do know that they train astronauts for it now to get them. They have simulations, so when astronauts go into space, they're not surprised by stuff.
So this is a common occurrence.
There's so many weird things that happen. Like one thing that happened to them when they were in space. Now this is getting back to the 2 data sets. So they've worked their whole lives to go into space, so they can't indicate that in any way they're mentally unstable. So when they go there and they come back, certain things happen. So one thing that happened was they were seeing like flashes of light when they came back down to Earth, and but they wouldn't tell anyone. And then finally, a bunch of them said, "Do you see this flash of light? Like when you close your eyes, you see light and everything like that." And they agreed that if they all reported it, they couldn't get fired. So this is how they were able to report weird stuff that they saw in space.
Isn't that crazy that exploring the outside of Earth, you have to be careful about what you say because
Yeah.
people think you're crazy?
That's right. That's right.
Isn't that bizarre?
Well, yeah. So it's these 2 data sets. So it happens here when people have, when they see things and then they have these strange things that happen. They tell authorities the stuff. Okay, yeah, I saw this. It was unknown. I don't know what it was. But then they tell their friends and family, I actually had this feeling that it was looking at me, and this is why I think that. And so they tell their subjective kind of weird things, to their families, their friends. So yeah, so you get that with astronauts too.
Because we like
Who is
normalcy.
at the front of the line when it comes to this stuff? Like, who has been studying this the longest, that has the greatest body of information available
About space and stuff.
about the emergent phenomenon of some sort of contact?
Okay. This is a hard question to answer because there is a person, but will this person say everything this person knows? Probably not. Okay, so, but there is an official NASA historian who, in my opinion, knows way more than he actually writes about, but he's written a heck of a lot. And his name is Stephen Dick. And
What a dick.
unfortunate name.
well, yeah, but it is his name. And he has an amazing body of work that anybody who's interested in this should read. He was also at the very beginning, he was part of the initial stages of creating astrobiology and, astrobiology.
And what leads you to believe that he's holding back information?
Well, when I go back and I'm in contact with him, and when I read what he's written, I can see that he was at the forefront of looking at this like AI back like 25 years ago. He was already talking about it, saying this is AI. ET is going to be AI, and this is why. And then kind of doing timelines and things like that. So, and also just conversations that I've had with him that are, basically correspondences that indicate to me that I think he probably has some information, but he, a lot of this is classified,
Right.
and probably for good reason.
What good reason?
I don't know, but
Yeah.
This is from his Wikipedia on astrobiology. I thought this. What we were just talking about.
They argued since the ancient Greeks, extraterrestrial life has been a theme tied to scientific cosmologies, including the ancient atomist, Copernican, Cartesian, and the Newtonian worldviews. Dick argues that from an epistemological point of view, the methods of astrobiology in the 20th century are as empirical as in any historical science such as astronomy or geology. Dick has also surveyed the field of astrobiology in critical issues in the history, philosophy, and sociology of astrobiology. On December 4th, 2013, while holding the NASA Library of Congress chair in astrobiology, Dick testified on astrobiology before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, arguing that SETI funding should be restored and integrated with the NASA astrobiology program. Hold on, go back to that. This part, the
Offering up a
intelligence
bishop.
principle.
Yeah, this is it. This
Is-
is the thing that he worked on like more than 20 years ago.
Is a hypothetical idea
Still gonna
of
take your
Dick's
fucking
in the
bishop.
field of cultural evolution, outlined his 2003 paper, Cultural Evolution, the Post-Biological Universe, and SETI. The intelligence principle describes a potential binding tendency among all intelligent societies, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial. The maintenance, improvement, and perpetuation of knowledge and intelligence is the central driving force of cultural evolution. And that, to the extent intelligence can be improved, it will be improved.
It doesn't actually have the next line that he writes about and
Can't
says,
say both.
and if it's not improved, it will be to the detriment of that society.
That certainly seems to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's him, but also Joe. It's not just him. There's a group. They're called the Invisible College, and I'm not going to name who they are. People can search them and find out their names. But they're part of this oral tradition and this hidden tradition that's been at the forefront of doing this type of work for over 50, 60, 70 years.
You're gonna have to do something about this.
So,
Thank you.
what has it been like for you to go from a person that before you visit this crash site, you think this is all nonsense,
Right.
to where you are now, having written 2 books about it and very careful with your words and realizing how bizarre this is,
Yes,
to
yeah.
now having this conversation with me in front of millions of people? Like, what has this been like for you?
Yes, it's been life
smart.
changing. Okay, so that's definitely
All
a
right.
fact. And in the beginning, it was uncomfortable. But I learned, this is where I learned about, you're talking about the pineal gland. And this is how I learned about this access. And I learned it through communities that are associated with this study. So I've learned about human potential. And I think that that's probably what's impacted me more than anything. And I also learned about structural evil in societies. And how has it been for me? I think it's been great.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I thought about it the other day because there were times when I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that I thought, I think the bad times have been worth it. The scary parts have been worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I went into this wanting to know, right? I'm a
Right.
professor of religion. I mean, I want to know. And I wanted to be a professor of religion since I was 11. And
Wow.
yeah, and now I am. And
That's cool to know what you want to do when you're 11.
yeah, it was pretty weird. But I knew. And now I feel like I'm getting answers. And it's not like I know conclusively.
Right.
Part of it is that we're not meant to know. Is that part of it is that it is a mystery. But it's a fascinating one. It's almost as if this, for me, you talked about obsession, it's that. Like I do it in and of itself. I think it's fascinating.
I often struggle with the concept that the human mind is incapable of grasping the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That even if it was presented to us, we don't have the capability to truly incorporate it into our not just worldview, but universe view, life view, existence view.
So good.
That it's too baffling. We're not quite ready yet. It's like showing Australopithecus a cell phone.
Right.
It's like,
right.
what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Like, what is this? We're not ready for it yet. And I really wonder, with the emergence of artificial intelligence and what seems to me, at least, to be the inevitable, not just incorporation of it into our lives, which has already happened, but incorporation into it biologically. I feel like that is a step that we're taking that seems inevitable. That seems there is going to be some sort of convergence, a merging of human consciousness and artificial.
just love.
I think artificial intelligence is the wrong term. I don't think it's artificial at all. I think it's a type of intelligence
And what's that
that's
kike?
created by the human being,
That's
and the
racist.
human being is biologically hindered by the fact that biological evolution is so slow and technological evolution is so insanely rapid, especially if sentient artificial intelligence becomes capable of creating its own version of artificial intelligence. And it's not hindered by the biological limitations of the human mind. You know, I think Elon said it best, and you talked about in this book, that we're the biological bootloader for
What's
artificial
that?
intelligence. I've described it before I heard that we're a caterpillar that's creating a cocoon to give birth to the electronic butterfly, and that this is also what fuels not just innovation but materialism. Materialism is inexorably connected to innovation, because one of the things about materialism is everybody wants the newest, latest, greatest thing, and status is attached to those things. We buy new cell phones. Like my friend had an iPhone. My friend's hilarious. My friend Eddie Bravo, he had an iPhone 13, and I go, "Why'd you get the 13?" He goes, "They gave it to me for free." And I was like, "Didn't you want a 15?" He's like, "Doesn't it do the same thing?" I'm like, "It really does." But I wanted a 15 when it came out. I have zero difference between my 15 and my 14. But I had to get the 15. You know, it's like there's something connected to us that wants the latest, greatest, and we're connected to this idea of materialism. And if you looked at the human being as an organism and you were separate from it, and you said, well, what does this thing do? Well, this thing makes better things constantly. That's all it does. That's what it does.
The
It does a
intelligence
lot of other
principle.
stuff.
Yeah.
It does a lot of other stuff.
But it makes better things.
But even the better
right back.
things it does, like when wars to control resources, why do they want resources? So they can make better things. It's all about better things. It's all about more control so that they have more access to more materials, to more better things. And that always, if you're dealing with intelligence and you're dealing with technological evolution and technological innovation, it's going to lead to artificial life or a new kind of life.
A new kind of life.
Yeah. And that might be the kind of life that literally becomes a god. If you think about it, if it continues to get, like there's, I was looking at this video that was on YouTube that was showing the stages of artificial intelligence, and that there's these multiple stages: artificial, general intelligence, sentient general intelligence, and then it goes to godlike artificial intelligence. But that is that what God is? And is that what we're doing? Are we making God? If God made us in his own image, are we making God? Is that what this whole thing is about?
Well, you know, these are some of the questions that I have when I go back to looking at
But that was on YouTube, that was life.
a new kind of life.
Yeah. And that might be the kind of life that dealing with intelligence and you're dealing with technological things. It's all about more control so that they have more access to more and the better things it does, like when wars to control resources. Why do they want resources? So they can make better things. It's all about better things. It's all about more control so that they have more access to more materials, to more better things. And that always, if you're dealing with intelligence and you're dealing with technological evolution and technological innovation, it's going to lead to artificial life or a new kind of life.
A new kind of life.
Yeah. And that might be the kind of life that literally becomes a god. If you think about it, if it continues to get, like there's, I was looking at this video that was on YouTube that was showing the stages of artificial intelligence, and that there's these multiple stages: artificial, general intelligence, sentient general intelligence, and then it goes to godlike artificial intelligence. But that is that what God is? And is that what we're doing? Are we making God? If God made us in his own image, are we making God? Is that what this whole thing is about?
Well, you know, these are some of the questions that I have when I go back to looking at some of the characteristics of these, like the Virgin Mary sightings and things like that. Like, we now have technologies that can replicate what it seems like was happening during that event, like in Garabandal in Spain in the 1960s. And if that's the case, then it looks like Stephen's idea of the intelligence principle is correct when he says that there will be intelligent beings that will appear like deities to us.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. And he also says, and I don't know if you've gotten to the chapter on Simone in the book, but she's a quantum AI person, and she talks about UFOs and she hates the word artificial intelligence. She says it's completely, we don't like make a painting and then say, see this artificial,
Right.
We don't do that.
Yes.
So why do we call it? Why? It's because she says we're afraid of it. We're afraid that it's going to be sentient, and we're afraid, she said, but it's just another life form that we happen to be creating.
Yes.
And she says it's special in that way, but it's also going to free us in many, many ways.
Ooh.
She's a tech optimist. She's an accelerationist.
Yeah. Well, I hope she's right. Because
She
it's
better
happening.
be right.
Yeah, it's happening no matter what.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think if you could go back again to Australopithecus and say, hey, man, one day you're going to be wrought with anxiety because there's existential angst, and you're going to be on antidepressants and living in a cubicle all day and doing. But that's the future. It's progress. Be like, fuck that.
Yeah,
I'd rather
yeah.
hang out here in the savannah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's this inevitable part of the process
It's so
of
fucked right now.
whatever we're going through, because we're not in a static state. We're in a
No.
constant state of
Yeah.
social upheaval, cultural upheaval, a change of perspectives, this constant battle to try to define things and to figure out what's appropriate and inappropriate, and gaslighting people who disagree with you, which is
Yeah.
also fascinating just to watch people do that. It's fascinating to watch people try to put a positive spin on inherently evil things.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
It's horrible.
Yeah. It's a bad show.
Yeah, it's a weird show. That's for
Yeah.
sure. It's a weird show.
Yeah.
But again, I do have this internal struggle with this concept of good and evil, that perhaps the negative aspects are there to enlighten us and to let us know that our work is not done, and that we have to move into a direction that we know is just and good and correct and loving, and that this is possible in small groups of people. It's possible with individuals, and ultimately must be possible with the collective. It just has to be managed in some way or facilitated in some way, and that it's not guaranteed. And that if you look at World War II and look at the Holocaust, you look at the horrific things that human beings are capable of when they're allowed to just run rampant. You talked about the Japanese horrors during World War II, like
That's
the rape
right.
in Nanking.
Yeah.
Nice
yeah,
fucking
that's
move,
right.
bro.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, I remember reading that, going,
Mhm.
how are human beings capable of doing this?
Yeah.
How are
The
people who are
savagery. Yeah. Unbelievable.
bizarre,
Yeah.
bizarre in its cruelty,
Unbelievable.
horrific?
We're gonna
And-
sacrifice.
That seems
He's
to
gonna
be
sacrifice
evil.
himself.
That seems to be evil
Yeah.
personified.
I think so.
But I mean,
I'm not
like-
afraid to say it.
Right, it is a thing.
Yeah.
Evil's a real thing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
evil's real.
I mean, as a professor, teaching my students, I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, evil's real. But here I'm going to say, and I've said this on podcasts, you can't say that human trafficking is not evil.
Right.
That's evil.
Evil.
And let's just call it for what it
Yes.
is. Yeah.
Human medical experiments on children.
Do
It's
that.
evil.
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 Yeah.
And we do it. And we do it almost specifically for profit,
Always.
which is also evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to the allegory of the cave and the Plato. So he's dealing with these questions of, it doesn't call it justice, but calls it injustice. I mean, he doesn't call it evil. So I guess what I'm trying to say is my position at this point, after doing the study of this kind of thing, is that it's the development of this mystic state that we've been talking about that I think this is how we need to counter, because we can't decide these are the rules we're going to follow. People aren't going to follow those rules, or they're going to follow those rules and cheat, right? Or they're going to pretend to follow the rules.
Right.
But if people actually engaged in the type of thing that we were talking about, the thing they love, that allows, then perhaps justice emerges, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to point out to people, that if we these ideas have been around for a long time. They're
Yes.
not new ideas, but we've never actually done them. Like,
Right.
small groups have done them.
So when you're alone with your thoughts, and you've been studying this for a long time now, what do you think the UFO phenomena is?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, that there are a lot of different varieties of it. But when we look at, like we were looking at the Francis of Assisi and the kind of historical things and the abductions and things like that, I think that it's been around for a long time, and that these are things that
Am I gonna get
are
away
in
with this?
communication with us. So I used what I do in my book, both the books that I wrote about this, is I talk to people who I think represent thousands of people. So each person in the book represents thousands, if not more, maybe many thousands of people who have had experiences and the ways in which they interpret them. So all of the people seem to have had experiences where now what they want to do is they actually want to work for justice in different ways. Like Jose, the veteran in my book, he's working with young people and
Fuck.
helping them deal with being addicted to
Fine.
social media and things like that, and helping them get through life, which is really hard right now. And that's what he's doing. And then you look
fucked
at
up
Dr.
very bad at the
Whiteley,
end, but
right? So
the time one.
she's working in the Space Force. She's trying to, help people deal with the fact that they're seeing things that, that could down planes and things like that. And she's helping people talk about that.
You're on
She's helping
here?
people. Each person in,
You'd have to go here.
is somehow doing what I'm
Here.
suggesting that I think
it would
is
play
an
different.
out.
Okay.
This kind of structural injustice that we see. So I think that this is a transformational thing without the drugs, is what's going on. Like some kind of massive experience that people are having,
Joe Rogan
and now it's
experience.
getting out, and people are being able to talk to each other through Reddit communities and different types of social media. So it is it's we did see religions, when they become viral at one point. We've never seen it in an age where we have digital technology, but this is what we're seeing now.
What do you think the physical objects are?
Huh.
Well,
Just do
okay,
this.
so this is something that's very interesting. We just looked at the Shroud of Turin. I believe that there are these, I would call them, and this is just my own non-scientific term, interdimensional objects.
Of course.
They're objects that have characteristics of our dimension and some other dimension.
So
Why does everyone say that, man? Interdimensional beings.
some other dimension has the capability, or something from some other dimension has the capability of transporting a physical object into our realm.
Or even imprinting onto a physical object. Yeah.
How so?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think
What do
that's
you mean
what.
by, what does that mean, imprinting onto
So
a
with the
physical
Shroud
object?
of Turin, we
Okay.
see the imprint of the image, and
If it's real.
yeah, if it's real. But it's an anomalous object. So we do have, from Gary Nolan, engineered objects that we don't know how they're engineered, but they definitely look like they're it's off planet. I would call the kinds of things that we see in the historical record interdimensional types of things. Now, how? I don't know, Joe. Okay, so I just don't know. But I do think that scientists in the government know that these things exist, and they would like to figure it out. And so part of disclosure, the disclosure movement, is outsourcing this and trying to get
It's
as many
fun.
people as possible to help in figuring it out.
What do you think when they use the term donations? What do you think the purpose of that is? If there is an object that is purposely released into our, like I'm sure you're aware of cargo cults, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So with cargo cults, for people that don't know, there's been some islands during World War I and World War II where planes landed there and they left, and these people they created these statues of these planes, and they worship them, and
they wanted them to come back.
Yes.
Yeah,
wanted them
because
to
they
come
got
back.
food and you know all
Yes.
kinds of wonderful things from the planes.
Right. And
yeah, like they thought of them as deities.
Right. The same way we
Yeah.
would think of something from
Like
somewhere
this.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that in my field has been called the cargo cult, the UFO cargo cult, right? And obviously Tyler and James view these parts as donate. They called it the donation site, right? So giving it the idea
Is that just one theory?
yeah, that's just one theory.
Are there other theories that there's a biological organism that encounters a lightning storm and it actually crashes and there's physical bodies?
Oh yeah,
that are
there
recovered?
is that. Yeah, there's that
Yeah.
going
What's your
around.
take on that? Because that's one of the things that Grush talked about and some of the other people talked about, that there are biological things that have been recovered.
Well, what impressed me about what he said was that he used the term biologics. And I actually know that term because that's the same term that Tyler was talking about when he was creating materials in anti-gravity spaces on space shuttles and such. So I was wondering, because David Grush does get his information from people allegedly in the programs, but he's never seen these materials that I know of.
I think he has
Fuck.
some firsthand experience that he was not able to talk about
Okay.
that he's alluding to.
Okay.
I
Right.
think, but this
Yeah.
is recent, and he's been very careful about how he releases this information and what he's able to release and not able to release. And
Right.
that I was like, okay,
Yeah.
really?
So I mean, I've not seen any bodies, nor have I seen
Oh, fuck.
intact craft, but I also have had. Now remember, I don't have a clearance like he has, so I can actually talk about what people have told me. I have had people tell me that yes, Diana, there are intact craft. I don't know. I mean, maybe. So I don't know, Joe.
Have you studied Bob Lazar?
Okay, yes, I am always asked about Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I can tell you that people that I've met who are associated with the programs tell me that he's right. Now I know his background and I know, all the things. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but I can also say that a lot of times people with very disturbing backgrounds, who could be easily discredited, are given information and shown things and told things.
Well, I would think that that's sort of like a little escape clause.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is.
I mean, the guy's obviously a genius and was obviously a propulsion expert. He put a fucking jet engine on a Honda in like the 1980s. He's a
I know. Yeah.
fascinating guy.
Yeah.
And, he claims that there's some element that exists in other places in the universe, which leads me to believe, not even to believe, but so here's the question. Are some of these things from other planets? Is that also in the equation? I mean, just because something is traveling
Plus 21. What the fuck?
we do know that there are an infinite number of planets
Yeah.
in the universe. I mean, we have no idea how many of them are capable of supporting human-like life
A weird picture.
or some other kind of life or an infinite number of varieties of life. And if that life can do what we've done and get to some part of its progression where it's capable of creating what we're calling artificial intelligence or super advanced technology, why wouldn't it come here?
Yes, I'm not discounting ET.
So that could be there too.
I think so, especially because of the ways in which the materials are being manufactured off planet, like the ones that we just saw. And that was information when I met Tyler 2014, and now it's a full-on thing that's happening, right? So it's a supercharged program of creating things that will help us off planet. I mean, certainly, then, yeah, I think so. I mean, but I don't know,
Right.
so I have to just be honest.
So it might be a bunch of different things happening all at the same time, interdimensionally, extraterrestrially, something from a distant galaxy that's figured out some new method of propulsion that's beyond our imagination that can visit and then also things that are coming here from other dimensions.
Yes, and even recently, somebody had, well, I can't say anything. I can't say I'm sorry. I don't
Oh.
want to be that person that
Okay.
goes on your show and
No,
says,
it's
"Oh,
okay.
I can't say that."
I
But
understand.
I probably, most likely there are if there's crash retrieval crash retrievals here on Earth, perhaps there are in space as well.
Do you, when they talk about inventions that emerged post Roswell, that's one of the points of speculation, is that we have back engineered something, and that this led to the creation of fiber optics and a lot of other technologies that seem to emerge after that time.
Yeah. So this question was prominent in my mind in 2012 when I met Jacques Vallée. So I was already aware of his work, even as a person who hadn't studied UFOs or even believed in them. Jacques Vallée is just one of these people, right, that you come across his work and he's fascinating. So I thought it was strange that not only was he a person who was, pre-engineered ARPANET, right? He was on ARPANET, which is pre-internet. He was creating that at the same time as being obsessed with UFOs and doing, being a ufologist. These things
Ufologist.
seemed that they had to be together, right? There was something that, what's going on here? So, and I'm in touch with him often. And he says a lot of things that are rather cryptic, but sometimes I ask him specifically, was what you were doing on ARPANET related to back engineered UFO parts? And then he'd say something like, there are many secrets in Silicon Valley, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's real cryptic. He's kind of difficult to have a conversation with publicly.
Well, it does have a lot. I guess there are lots of secrets in Silicon Valley.
Of course.
Which is where he lives.
Yeah. Another thing that was really fascinating about your book was you were talking about how much religion he studied.
Yes. That was really interesting. So in the book, what I do is I uncover not just him, but Alan Hynek. They were friends. And they were both Rosicrucians, which is a form of, he might not like me to say this, but it's a form of mystical Christianity in a sense. But a lot of Rosicrucians don't view their roots as Christian. They look at it as Egyptian. But it's basically, it's an esoteric tradition. And it involves meditation. I think it most likely involves this thing that you and I have been discussing in the whole talk so far is the pineal gland thing, the access point, because both of them believe in this kind of life, this meditating and things like that. And so I included references. Everything I say in my books, by the way, I pass to the person that I'm writing the chapter about. So everything that I said about Jacques, I gave it to him beforehand, and I said, are you okay with me saying this publicly? And so it passed all the tests. And I also talk about going to his apartment and seeing his library, which is an amazing library. And he has stained glass from Chartres Cathedral. And Chartres Cathedral is a special place for Rosicrucians, like a special place of presence of the sacred. So, and he actually did those himself. So he learned how to do stained glass from people at Chartres, by the way. And yeah, just amazing. And he had a lot of books on angels and fallen angels in that library, like almost like it was almost like going into the Vatican archive, going into this place, because these looked like first editions or close. So, really, really old books about this topic.
Fallen.
Yeah. I was pretty shocked when I went. We were going to have lunch and talk about the crash site and maybe talk about, what I learned from Tyler and that kind of thing. And we went to lunch, and then he said, do you want to see the library? And I was like, yes, of course. So I saw the handwritten documents from Project Blue Book. And that was just going into the library. That wasn't actually in the library. Then when we got in there, I noticed big bookcases of these books. And of course, I was drawn to them. And he said he picked out one and he opened it and it was about angels. And he said, this is a book about angels. And I could see that. And I was looking at it. I was like, wow. And then I looked at the other bookshelf and that bookshelf was just as impressive. And then it was about fallen angels. He said, oh, this one's about fallen angels. And then he made a joke and he said, you can't have one without the other. And I thought that was really interesting.
That does seem to align with what we're talking about, with like the struggle of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
It does. That's what he said too, and I was actually shocked at that point. I was like, "Wow!" So just I'm a professor of religion, so I'm like, I'm right about my intuition was somehow confirmed.
And by the way, I think this should be. I'm not sure if this is totally true, but I believe he was the inspiration for the French character in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Absolutely.
That's
Because
him.
Hynek's in there, and then there's him. Yeah.
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 It's wild stuff.
Yeah.
What do you make of the reports of this craft that's supposedly 40 feet long, and you get inside of it,
And
it's
it's really
big
small.
as a football field?
Yeah. Oh, that one. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the time dimensions and okay, so people I know who do the work and are physicists, they describe this in quantum language, which I cannot replicate at all. But this is how they're describing it. They're saying that and by the way, it's really interesting that, when I'm doing my research into the Catholic history and I'm looking at some of the things that we can do now technologically that it looks very, like people back then were like, this is a miracle, right?
Sure.
Okay. So what they're doing is a similar type of process or method. So basically what they're doing is they're looking at people's descriptions and data of craft, right? And they're then identifying the patterns and they're saying if there was a quantum field, this would make perfect sense.
Right.
So if this was occurring in a quantum field, this would make sense.
That this thing would look small on the outside and doing it, and it's immense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think this information is getting released? Why do you think it's becoming a more mainstream?
Because we're too gay to
acceptable
handle it.
thing to discuss. Because to the average person that sees this, the thought, I think, sort of naturally goes to this idea that some sort of contact is inevitable, some sort of revelation, some sort of landing on the White House lawn type deal.
Okay. I have a couple thoughts on that. The first one is that part of the reason is because China's now in space. So before it was us and Russia. We were the only ones. We were together, actually. So, we were aligned. Even though at many points we were enemies on Earth, in space we weren't enemies. We were working together, using each other's equipment. So also keeping the secrets that perhaps we're seeing in space. But now that other countries are going into space, whatever is up there will be known. And I think part of it has to do with this phenomena. And so that's why it's urgent to get this message out. That's one of my ideas. I have some other ideas, but that's the one that's most prominent, is because I just don't think that it's going to be a secret for very much longer. And in fact, right now, a lot, Chinese are, they are going into space and they are looking at things. And
so from a national security standpoint, it's important to sort of move this conversation further, accelerate it.
I think so.
Are you hopeful with all this information that you have? Are you hopeful about the direction that the world is going?
I would say that I'm simultaneously hopeful and horrified. Okay, and how can you be both? I just am, because it seems like a lot of things are happening that are terrible and will continue to happen and may even ramp up. Okay. At the same time, there is what I believe to be an awakening happening as well. And I think that's also going to ramp up. And as long as we have some portion of the collective awake, I think there's hope.
Nice answer.
All right. Let's wrap it up on that. Well, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. It
Yeah,
was
thank you.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Fascinating
yeah.
conversation.
Awesome.
When more stuff comes out, let's do it again.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Bye, everybody. This episode is brought to you by Mizzen and Main. No matter where you're listening, no matter what job you have, the clothes you wear to work say a lot about you.
All
And
right,
if
goodbye.
you're
Fuck
wearing
off.
a